Good evening and welcome to a new edition of To The Point. Earlier today, a conference for the future, discussing the future of peaceful nuclear energy was launched in Moscow. It's a three-day conference in which 52 countries will be participating, including Egypt. This evening on To The Point, we'll be discussing what will be the agenda of this conference or the outcome expected of this conference. And more importantly, nuclear developments here in Egypt will be under discussion. With us this evening is Dr. Amr Mohsen, who is a professor of renewable energy at Alexandria University. A pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you.
This three-day conference, is it, I believe it's a regular conference which Atom Russia, or Russia Atom usually holds. When we say the future of peaceful use of nuclear energy, it sounds very complicated. What is the future peaceful use of nuclear energy?
You're right. It's nuclear energy and its uses, whether it's for generating electricity or different uses in industry or other uses, is a very multifaceted topic. Mm-hmm. And not every information is put up clearly, unfortunately, for understandable reasons, of course, because part of the applications are not specific applications. Mm-hmm. When people talk about developments in nuclear technology, they mean that we are now in the third generation of reactors and people are working on the fourth generation. And when it started up in late 40s, late 1940s, early 1950s, that was, of course, the first generation of nuclear reactors to generate electricity. There has been developments, continuous development, and they came up with a second generation, and it took also its time, and it showed through experience that development continues to be required. And we're now on the third generation, and people talk about the fourth generation being a bit delayed. Some people expected it to be available, say in this year or next year, but it was put up for another 4 to 5 years. So we're now in the third generation, and you find that much of the nuclear reactors worldwide, and there's around 550 nuclear reactors to generate electricity worldwide. Much of the ones that started off with first and second generation have now been retired and put out of service. So we are now the predominant and the prevalent generation is the third generation in technology. And like I said, people are working on the fourth generation. So it's a continuous development, like every other discipline of science and industry. In the conference, one of the statements that was issued by Russian officials is that their pledge to continually support Egypt and their pledge to help in the building of the Daba nuclear power plant. People are concerned about this plant. People, when I say people, I mean people in Egypt are concerned due to the safety, security, the close proximity of it being within a residential area. Can you shed light on how will this power plant, is it safe, and how will it change our lives here in Egypt? Right. Okay, maybe we could start by letting everyone know what is a nuclear power plant or a nuclear reactor to generate electricity. You know, we have in Egypt around 40 power plants that generate electricity. And most of these plants convert heat into electricity. And most of them, 2/3 of them, just boil water. So they use the fuel, be it natural gas, or be it mazout, or be it diesel, or be it any other hydrocarbon fuel, to burn it and to extract that heat energy from that fuel. And then they use that heat energy to just boil water. And then the steam that is produced is directed into a steam turbine, which is coupled with an electricity generator. So when the turbine turns, you have electricity generated. So this is the conventional power plants that exist for decades in Egypt.
Yes.
Now, what's different in a nuclear power plant to generate electricity? Nothing is different. The only difference, you need to generate steam, and you direct the steam towards exactly the same steam turbine that has coupled to it exactly the same electricity generator and generate electricity in the same way. The only difference is that the heat that you get, the source of the heat that you use to boil the water to generate the power steam to operate the plant, instead of coming from having burnt a hydrocarbon fuel, like we said, natural gas or coal, as many people do, etc. Instead of burning a fuel, you just rely on radioactive material, uranium, etc., to generate the heat that you want in order to be able to boil the water. That's the only difference.
Okay.
So when we talk about a nuclear power plant to generate electricity, it's actually the only innovation, if you like, or the only difference is that part where you have the uranium rods generating the heat required. So when, in your question, you said that some people are worried.
They're concerned to a close proximity to a residential area.
And of course I share that concern for a number of reasons. First, because the fission technology, as it's termed scientifically, that happens in order to generate in the uranium rods, the fuel rods of that power plant, nuclear power plant, the actual control of that reaction of splitting the atoms can sometimes go out of control. And that would be, of course, a big threat. And there are lots of measures to be able to act when this happens and if that happens. So, of course, that generates lots of concerns to people, and I fully understand that, and I share that concern myself. We've seen a number of accidents worldwide happening, like in 1986, the Chernobyl disaster. It went exactly for that reason. You know, the chain reaction in the uranium rods to generate the heat went out of control, and then we all know what happened later. In the Fukushima in March 2011 in Japan, same thing happened. You had a tsunami, and the tsunami made that part of the nuclear reactor where you have the heat generated through the uranium rods go out of control. And we all know what happened later on. So it's a very legitimate concern. I personally share that concern. And
but what about the technology? I mean, has technology advanced to the point where such risks are quite minimal?
Yeah. Yeah, this is what is meant by calling the technology first generation, second generation, and currently the third generation. And like I said at the beginning, working on generation number 4.
Which generation would the Daba power plant be? Third generation.
Yes. The Russians say that they have implemented in the design that they intend to construct lots of precautions to make it a lot safer. But you know, it's really a situation that is not easy to handle, because, for example, when the Fukushima disaster happened, we all know it happened in Japan. But the pollution and with radioactive material went out all the way to California. So it's when you have that is something that is very characteristic of nuclear power plants. If you have a conventional power plant that burns natural gas, for example, if you have a total failure in that station, the damage remains constrained to the location But in the nuclear reactors, the issue is very different. Because, you know, it just spreads out uncontrolled. I'll give you another example. When the Chernobyl disaster happened in 1986, the Irish government in Ireland, very distant, ordained farmers to stop using milk cow milk because it was no longer fit for human consumption because of the pollution that came all the way from the Chernobyl accident. So really the dimensions of anything that goes wrong are quite significant.
The risks are quite high, I understand this, but are the benefits higher?
Well, it depends on your evaluation criteria. Let's take the example of Japan, for example, and ask ourselves, why did Japan go nuclear in the first place? Japan is a series of volcanic islands. They have very little area that is really flat and simple, you know, because of being geologically a volcanic island. It means that it's very steep mountains. So the area of land that they have, you know, just for regular sort of activity is quite limited. Secondly, they have absolutely no hydrocarbons in the country. Absolutely nothing, zero. They don't have natural gas, they don't have oil, they don't have anything. Okay. Now, that's in terms of their circumstance and in terms of their resource. They don't have even coal, which is a dirty fuel, as we all know.
Yes.
They don't even have that. So if we take the situation of the government of Japan, you find that here you are, you have very limited space, you are an island isolated from mainland Asia. You have an economy that you're trying to build, and you're building it based on industry. And when you say industry, you say energy. You need energy in all its forms, not just electricity. You need heat, for example, for a number of industries. So there you are, you're starting to build that economy for your country, for your people, but you don't have any local fuel resources, and you're not even easily connected to mainland. You know, you're separated by the ocean. So that puts the criteria for the Japanese government to go nuclear somewhat understandable. But that same criteria isn't the same for other countries. So what I'm trying to say is that, to answer your question, you said, why would one go nuclear? It depends on how you evaluate your situation. If you are in, for example, the place of Germany, let's take another example. Germany, the only fuel they have, indigenous fuel they have on their land, is coal. Yeah? And the coal they have is brown coal, which is even worse.
Worse in pollution.
Yeah, in the pollution and the air pollution and everything. But that's the only indigenous fuel that they have. So there, again, it's a country with a population of probably 80 million people, somewhat similar to Egypt in number. And they have built a very strong economy based on exporting industrial goods. So again, you talk, same like Japan, the Japanese, you talk industry, you talk a very strong demand for all sorts of fuel, electricity, heat, etc., etc. So what did the Germans do? They said, okay, we shall burn indigenous coal that we have, be it brown or otherwise, we'll just burn it. So a bit more than a quarter of the electricity and the heat they generate for their industry and for their population comes from burning that dirty coal. Now, the other quarter is by burning imported Russian natural gas, with all the political consequences of doing that, of course. But they still have a demand that they have to meet.
Yes.
Okay, the third quarter comes from burning other types of fuels and also importing sometimes electricity from France. And of course France is predominantly nuclear electricity. And the last quarter is through their nuclear reactors. But then they decided that it was time to get rid of nuclear. And, you know, they chose to get rid. They have two polluting quarters, if you like, and risky quarters. They have the quarter that is supplied by nuclear fuel and the other one by dirty coal. But the priority of getting rid of one of the two went for nuclear. So they decided they are going off nuclear altogether. And that was also based on popular demand because the German people were not happy with having nuclear reactors around. So they started to pressure the government, and the German government finally promised to get rid of the nuclear, but then the people put even more pressure on the government to make it be set as a law, not just a promise. So it became a law that Germany will go out of nuclear, and they set a date which is 2022.
Yes.
And so far they close everything, and they're working on the 9 remaining reactors.
So why is it that we're having a conference about the future of peaceful use of nuclear energy when some countries are shifting away from the use of nuclear energy?
Well, it's simple. Because if you have a product, no matter what and how people view your product, you still want to sell it. So you promote it. Simple. So even if, you know, for cigarettes, of course, lots of people see cigarettes as something that shouldn't be put on the market and shouldn't be made available to the layman and to everybody, but still you have cigarette companies and they make advertisements. Advertisements for cigarettes are banned in some countries, but in other countries they're not. And even if the advertisements are banned, they still use other means to reach the customer by using, for example, drama on TV. You see the hero who's loved by everybody, smoking cigarettes and feeling better after he did. So that's advertisement for cigarettes.
When we talk about nuclear energy, there is peaceful and not so very peaceful use.
Yeah.
Why is it that a country which is refusing to adhere the norms and to the rules of peaceful use of nuclear energy, why should it be participating in such a conference?
You know, most countries refrain from being politically blunt. Yeah, that's, I think, the definition of politics.
But some countries are very blunt.
Those are the exceptions. Exceptions to the rule.
Yes.
But most governments, most entities, they politically want to keep the situation very blurred and very smoky and not clear. So regardless of how they view a certain thing, in our case nuclear technology, they just refrain from making their true opinions clear to the public. And they might even act contrary to what they believe in just because of other purposes.
But if you refuse to sign the NPT, for example, why should you be part of a conference discussing peaceful use of nuclear energy? Because if your intent is peaceful use, then why wouldn't you sign the NPT? Or is my understanding wrong? Is this not the way it is in nuclear energy?
It's politics. Of course, NPT is a non-proliferation treaty, just that everybody could follow. It's an agreement that is binding for any government that would sign it. So,
binding with what?
To refrain from carrying out any nuclear activity if you sign. So many countries refuse to sign, like Israel, for example, never signed, and I don't think they ever will. Egypt has signed a long time ago. People like Iran, for example, also refuse to sign the NPT. So again, it's not, like I said at the very beginning, it's not really a straightforward issue. Politics play a lot. Also, the balance of regional power, the balance of global power comes very much into play. Because, you know, if we look at the MENA region, Middle East, North Africa region, you find that, okay, here we have Egypt that has signed the NPT since decades. And by the way, Egypt has 2 nuclear reactors. I'd like to say a word about this because I don't think everybody knows that. And I think it should be made public knowledge to everyone that in the mid-1950s, Egypt has started a nuclear program and has received a nuclear reactor that is quite small, only 2 megawatt, but it's still working up till today, and that's in the Inchos site. And then again, in the mid-90s, Egypt acquired a bigger nuclear reactor from Argentina, made in Argentina, and that the power rating of that is 20 megawatt. So it's 10 times bigger than the original Russians of the 1950s, but still 20 megawatt is something really small. And they are in continuous use and in continued use for
generating electricity?
No, not for generating electricity, but because you need radioactive material in a number of industries. In the pharmaceutical industry, for sterilization. You need it for also sterilizing particular seeds used in agriculture. So there are a number of peaceful applications for nuclear energy other than just generating electricity. And I'm very happy that we do have this facility in Inchos, where we have the 2 nuclear reactors, because that fulfills our requirements for those radioactive sources, because you need them also in the medical field. Yeah. So the fact that we generate our own requirements for radioactive sources for those uses in the medical field, in the pharmaceutical industry, in the agriculture, etc., that I think is a very positive thing, and I'm fully in support of it. But that, of course, is a different story from generating electricity. And the project you mentioned in your question, which is the agreement that has been signed with Russia, such that Russia supplies us with 4 nuclear reactors, and each has a capacity of generating 1,200 megawatts of electricity. So
is this going to be the main purpose of those nuclear reactors?
Well, I cannot read minds. But
are we going to, for example, use them for medical purposes, what have you?
No.
It's mostly electricity.
Yeah. When you're carrying out activity in the field of generating radioactive material for those uses we talked about in the medical field and pharmaceutical, and for checking pipelines, integrity of pipelines, etc., those civilian uses, if you like, then it's a totally different story from generating electricity. The reactors supposed to be installed in Daba are just dedicated to generate electricity. They shall not produce any sources for...
How much electricity? I mean, for example, will they solve our energy problem in terms of electricity? Do you think those 4 generators?
That's an excellent question. We just found out that the total generating capacity of all 4 new nuclear reactors or power plants in Daba is 4,800 megawatts. Okay, now today the full generation in Egypt of electricity, full generating power, if you like, is of the order of 32,000 megawatts. So you're talking 5,000 compared to 32,000. And believe you me, the 4,800 megawatts will not come into service before 8 to 10 years from now. From the day you start building a power plant, nuclear power plant to generate electricity, it's not like conventional one.
8 to 10 years for it to be operational?
Yes.
Okay.
To come into service, it takes 8 to 10 years. And there are also exceptions. For example, you know, France is a country that is very nuclear for its own reasons. If we have time, we could go into understanding the reasons why, or the motivation that led France into going nuclear the way they are. And they are trying to withdraw now, even France are trying.
So the trend is to withdraw?
Yes, of course. Of course. Of course. And let me continue this to put it into context.
Go ahead.
By the time we start to put the 4,800 nuclear megawatts into service, we will be, like I said, 8 to 10 years from now. By that time, the Egyptian electricity generation capability would have reached something like 45,000 megawatts. So when you talk about adding another 4,800, or let's call it 5,000, just to make it short, then you're talking about adding something of the order of 15%, 15 to 20%. That's not really very significant. And you might ask me, couldn't we substitute that additional power capacity that the nuclear project will bring by a different source of generating electricity? And the answer, of course, is absolutely.
Well, there are other sources.
Yes. I'll give you some numbers. We know since the mid-90s, through a very thorough study that was done by the Danes in Denmark, came to Egypt, and they volunteered, they proposed to make a thorough study of the wind energy resources that Egypt possesses. And for somebody to really assess in an accurate way the wind resources of a place, a location, you have to carry on continuous measurements for at least 12 years. So it's not something that is done in a week or two. And they did that. They did a very thorough job, which leads everybody to believe that the results are quite accurate. So they've done this thorough analysis, and they came up with a conclusion that is public knowledge and is available for everyone since already the mid-90s, and is even available online. Anybody could Google the thing and find it. They say that the west coast of the Gulf of Suez possesses, El Sukhna, Zafarana, and all these names familiar to everybody. We possess a potential to generate 20,000 megawatt of electricity from wind energy alone in that location alone. There are other locations in Egypt with significant wind resources, like, for example, on the Mediterranean coast, close to Daba, by the way, incidentally. Also in Upper Egypt, we have resources, but let's say the top resources that we have are 20,000 gigawatts or 20,000 megawatts of wind-generated electricity, which is to be compared to the 4,000, or let's call it 5,000 megawatts of nuclear in Daba in 10 years. So 4 times from wind alone. Let me tell you about another thorough study that was done by the Germans this time. The Germans also came to the Egyptian government in the late 90s, and they volunteered to carry a thorough study on the solar energy resources that Egypt possesses. And they did that. and it was called Solar Mission, and they published, and everything is open information available. Everybody can Google this, yes. Solar Mission, and find the reports of the study. We said that to assess your wind resources, you need 12 years at least of continuous measurement. In the case of solar, it's a lot more relaxed. All you need is, let's say, a couple of years. So they did that. They continuously measured using satellite and using ground sensors, which are more accurate than the satellite, of course, sensing, because this is actual on the ground. And they came up with a conclusion that I feel very proud as an Egyptian to repeat it every time I get a chance to do that. And the conclusion is that they said that if Egypt builds a power plant that converts the heat of the sun into electricity, only in the places where the site is suitable for building such a plant. Meaning that all the Nile Delta with the vegetation and the population and so on is excluded from the map. The Nile Valley, again, population and agriculture and so on, so again, this is excluded. If you look at the Red Sea coast, we have a mountain chain of the Eastern Desert that is parallel to the Red Sea. Of course, it's not easy to build a plant on such a mountain. Remember, we talked about Japan and their difficulties. So we exclude all that mountain chain, all that area. If you look at the Western Desert, you have the Qattara Depression, 150 meters below sea level. So again, you wouldn't build a plant there unless you have to. So you just exclude it. So if you continue to exclude, there are huge areas in the Western Desert where you have moving sand dunes with wind. So that, of course, makes it less appropriate to build a plant on such sites. So again, you remove them. You take, for example, the Lake Nasser behind the high dam. You're not going to build a plant on the lake. So it's 6,000 kilometers, you just exclude it. So you continue to exclude and exclude and exclude. Again, South Sinai, very mountainous, exclude all that. So you really exclude every location.
Quite a large proportion
of the land. Of the country. Now, if on that remainder of the area of Egypt, you build such plants to convert the heat of the sun into electricity, you will generate an amount of electricity which would satisfy the demand for electricity of the entire planet 6 times over.
Just in the other areas that you were talking about, which represent what percentage of Egypt?
Would be perhaps of the order of 15% maybe of the 1 million square meters that we have.
We are 15% of this land can be used for as a good source of solar energy.
Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't need to build those plants because, like I said, you will generate electricity that could satisfy the global demand for electricity 6 times over. So
what I understand, but what I'm saying, you can satisfy your needs.
Yes.
And export as well.
Absolutely.
And it's clean energy without any side effects.
You don't burn anything.
Whenever you talk about renewable energy, especially solar panels or solar energy, you're always told, well, the argument was always that it is expensive because you have to store in batteries and the batteries are quite expensive and the maintenance.
Excellent point that you raised. Now, let's talk about, you raised 2 points, expensive, and the second one, storage. So let's address them.
Usually, I'm not an expert, but whenever we discuss this, I'm always faced with, we can't do it, it's expensive, the batteries are expensive, what have you.
You asked to the point questions, so I congratulate you on that. So let's address the 2 issues. First, expensive. Okay. Only 10 days, 2 weeks ago, Dubai has launched a tender, international tender, for people to come, investors from any part of the world, to come and invest into building an 800 megawatt solar power plant, not solar thermal, but solar photovoltaic. Those panels you see on the roofs and so on. So Dubai issued that tender for somebody to come and invest into building 800 megawatts of solar photovoltaic panels, such that the electricity they generate, the Dubai government would just buy as a finished product. So they wouldn't have to bother with making the investment or anything. So it's like an IPP, independent power producer. And they've launched that many months ago, and only 10 days ago they have selected the winner and signed the contract. Now, what is the price of electricity that investor, meaning profit of course, has signed and committed to supply and sell to the Dubai government? 2.99 cents, US dollar cents per kilowatt hour. The kilowatt hour is the unit of electricity that we all consume. So for the unit of electricity, they would charge the government of Dubai. The investor has taken all the burden, site preparation, equipment, everything, electrical wiring, everything. So that, the Dubai government just gets the electricity without having worried about anything or spent anything. So the investor would still make money selling at that price the electricity generated. Now that has made quite a drama everywhere in the world, worldwide, because people started to realize that the decline we have all been hearing about in the cost of wind energy, solar thermal energy, and solar photovoltaic energy is really true. Because many people hadn't believed yet. But now that you see a private investor meant for profit is selling at such a price. Now, perhaps to make the number meaningful to everybody, let's see how much does the same unit of electricity cost if you generate it out of burning natural gas, for example, in a conventional power plant. Now, if you look at the international prices, you find people talking about somewhere in the 9 US dollar cents per kilowatt hour. So 2.99, or let's call it 3 US dollar cents per kilowatt hour is 1/3 of that generated by conventional power plant burning natural gas to generate electricity. Now, would you like to know the price of the unit of electricity generated through a nuclear power plant?
Okay.
All right. If you ask the question, people's reaction would vary from either pretending they haven't heard anything and they won't respond, or they would lie and give you a price. Now, people say when they lie, they say, well, it's in the $10 cents per kilowatt hour. And if you say
that is the cost,
them, that's the cost they say.
Okay.
So I'd like to elaborate on this a little bit. Now, if you press them a little bit, they say, okay, 12. Now, if you press them a bit more, then you realize that the real cost is more than double. Certainly more than double of that. Why? Why do I say so? Because normally in the economics of power generation, the way you do it, you say, okay, I have the capital cost, which is the money that I will have to spend in order to prepare the location, set up all the hardware, all the buildings, put the fence and everything, buy the turbines, buy the boilers, buy the burners and everything. So that's the capital investment cost. So I will have to consider that. Secondly, I have to consider the fuel cost. And of course, there's a big question mark because you're talking, even conventional power plant, you're talking about 30, 40 years of service. Yes. And nobody could predict what the fuel price will be 10 years from now,
exactly.
20 years.
1 year from now.
So, exactly. So what you do is that you assume a certain price scenario that you have to pay for the fuel. And of course you add that. And then you add the maintenance cost, and then you add the manpower cost, and so on. And then you have a big number, that you divide over the units of electricity, and that gives you the cost of the unit of electricity. Some people do that roughly, other people do it more carefully and accurately, and they call it the LEC, levelized energy cost. So if you do the LEC for a conventional power plant, this is the way you do it. Now, in a nuclear power plant, they do that even though it is not complete. Why? Because let's say you've built two plants, conventional one burning nuclear gas, natural gas, and a second one which is a nuclear power plant, side by side. Okay, so you paid a certain capital investment here, another capital investment there. 40 years on, or 50 years on, when both come to retirement, you will just restore that plant back, or the site where that plant is built, to its original condition. So what you do is that you salvage whatever you can, and you sell it, and you sell the turbine, and you find somebody to buy, old turbine.
That's for the nuclear?
No, that's for the conventional power plant, burning natural gas.
Okay.
Now, you cannot do the same for the nuclear power plant, because the disposal cost of the nuclear power plant,
expensive,
through actual experience done by England, done by France, done by the US, done by many countries, has proven to be higher. Disposal costs has proved to be higher than the cost of building the plant to start with. Which means that if you quote a certain cost of electricity generation through nuclear, then, okay, I'll believe you, but to be able to make that number realistic, I have to at least double it, if not more.
Because I have to add the cost of disposing.
Exactly.
And how long, what is the lifetime?
Which is never added.
What is the lifespan of a nuclear power plant? Does it have a lifespan?
Yeah, of course. The first nuclear power plant that was ever built.
The first generation.
Yeah, of the first generation. But the first ever built to generate electricity out of nuclear was built in the UK. And that was in the early 1950s. Now, that plant, of course, has been retired. Okay? So many other plants that succeeded that. So they started off with a lifespan for nuclear power plants to generate electricity of, let's say, 30 to 40 years. Now they say they have extended that to 60 years. Fine.
So it takes me 10 years to build it, and it only lives 60 years.
Yeah. And then...
And it's quite expensive to dispose of it.
Exactly. And you look, for example, at the UK government. The UK government has just published, because they have 57 sites where they are trying to restore back to the original conditions after the facility, the nuclear facility they had has expired, and they really want to get
restoring is as expensive?
Yeah, let me give you that number first. So do you know how much budget did the UK government publicly admit to have
allocated?
Yeah, allocated, exactly, to that project of getting rid of or restoring the 57 locations? 125 billion pounds sterling.
And how much would it cost to build them?
I'm sure a lot less than that.
But unfortunately, you just cannot, they cannot disappear like that.
Let me give you another number,
okay,
which actually responds to the remark you just made by saying they won't disappear like that. Exactly. To restore those sites back, they will spend this 125 billion pounds sterling over 120 years. You cannot restore the plant just in a matter of weeks or months, or you need decades. And this is through actual experience in Sellafield and other locations in the UK. Now, let me tell you another quick story that shows that even building a plant, we're no longer talking about restoring the site back or disposing of the nuclear waste that is humongous quantity over the 60 years, accumulate, of course, because even The white coats that the technicians wear when they're working inside the nuclear power plant, you cannot just get rid of them because they become nuclear waste. Okay, it has low radioactivity, but it's still waste. You cannot just throw it in the bin. You have to dispose of it properly, like you dispose of the spent fuel rods, etc., etc. So anyway, a project that was signed between the government of France and the government of Finland. That contract for France to build a nuclear power plant to generate electricity in Finland was signed about 8 years ago. And they were supposed, the contract says that the French will finish the building of the plant in 4 years and will put it into service in the 8th year. It will start, the electricity it will generate will just go through the national grid in Sweden. Now, time has passed, the project has not been completed on time, and the two governments started to quarrel, and the French company said, we're sorry, but we have to amend the contract. So the Finns asked what amendment is required, and they said, it's simple, we just need to double the cost of building the plant. We signed on a certain amount of money. If you really want it to reach the grid and be connected, we have to double that amount of money. So just to tell you that it's not trouble-free. You could have problems.
Yes. We have a couple of minutes left, and maybe I'll take us back to the starting point. Do you think the conference, which started today and it will be wrapping up this Thursday, might recommend that the future use of nuclear, peaceful use of nuclear energy is really not to use nuclear energy? Because I'm sensing that maybe the negatives outweigh the positives.
Certainly.
For peaceful use, at least.
If I would make a conference to promote cigarettes, I will never allow the conference to end up with a conclusion that cigarettes are bad for your health or smoking is bad for your health. I will certainly end up on a different note, that it relieves stress, it will make you more appealing, whatever, blah, blah, blah. So
but we will ignore the lung cancer issue.
Yeah, of course.
Dr. Amr Mohsen, I really don't know how to thank you about the enlightening picture that you just shed light on, and maybe one of the positives is that Egypt has a lot of potential. And if people really want to invest, there is a lot of room to invest, especially in the renewable energy sector. So it's not just in factories and products, but there is a lot of quite a large scope for in future investment.
Local manufacturing is the word I'd like to end on.
Thank you very, very much for your fruitful input. I'd like to thank you, the viewers, and for Muslims worldwide, I'd like to wish you all a very happy Ramadan. Next week, To The Point will be aired at 11 p.m. Cairo local time, and have a very happy Ramadan. Good night.